Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's an honor for me tonight to introduce you to Deborah Crowe. She is an executive and business coach. She has 30 years of global experience in the top Fortune 500 companies in Canada, US, Europe, Asia, and Australia, leading and coaching C-suite leaders, executive and senior management professionals, and their teams. She's been CEO of her own company, and she knows how to get to the top, hold that senior position, and integrate career and family in her coaching practice. She provides the tools, strategies, programs, and support to help create meaningful change in the people that she coaches' lives. Deb, welcome to my show. How are you?
Hi, Brian. I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So how'd you get into this coaching business?
I was a disability management case manager for 21 years, and I did a lot of auto insurance claims, WSIB claims, and I did a lot of short-term disability claims for executives. And as the years went on, more executives were going off on short-term disability claims. And then in my last 2 years of being a case manager, I had 5 particular claims where the executives went from a short-term disability claim to a long-term disability claim. They were all diagnosed with cancer, and unfortunately, they all passed away. So it really hit home with me because I chatted with them and visited with them and held their hand in hospice. And I made a vow to all of them that I would get out of the generalist space of managing these claims and become a preventionist and transition into a different career or business. Didn't know what that was at the time, where I could help executives so that they could thrive at work and in life and not with a diagnosis that would have an outcome that they had.
That must have been very tough.
It was really tough. And I think my saving grace was I've lost a lot of friends and family to cancer, and I'm a volunteer at hospice. And I think that resilience over many, many decades of loss, going right back to losing my dad at age 21, I think that relatability really helps me be an even better coach because I know exactly how these people feel, especially if they have someone in their life who's sick or injured or has been given a diagnosis or has become palliative. So I certainly see it as a gift that resilience has given me in my life.
What did they say to you?
All 5 of the executives?
Yes.
They told me 2 things. That was kind of the commonality, which I never forgot, and it's engraved in my heart, and I share it with executives when they think they want to hit that proverbial glass ceiling and think extrinsically with material things and salaries, etc. They told me they didn't speak their truth because they were working in a toxic culture, and they told me that they didn't live their life. And that was their 2 biggest regrets, all of them.
They didn't live their life. What's the lesson?
I think the lesson is right now. We're living it. I think the lesson is we as global citizens, we got a big emotional tsunami. I think we got shaken up, and I think we've reprioritized what's really important. And I think we've gone back to generational values and beliefs of our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents. Families are eating meals together again. Families are baking, families are talking, families are cooking. You know, technology became so dependent and routine and structured in our lives that I think people forgot that there were all kinds of things to do in this world prior to the onset of technology and losing that beautiful art of connecting with people.
Deb Crowe, thank you so much. That's profound. We're going to take a break and come back more with Deborah Crowe in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're chatting tonight with Deborah Crowe, who is an executive and business coach. She's got 30 years of experience in top 500 Fortune 500 companies, and she's coaching people in that C-suite about heart-centered leadership. What is heart-centered leadership?
Heart-centered leadership is the ability to lead based on your connection with people.
Your connection with people. What do you mean by that? Explain.
So when we think about the culture of an organization, you and I were speaking about how cultures can have toxicity. The culture of any organization is based on the behavior of whoever is leading at the helm, which is the CEO. So when the CEO can lead with heart-centered qualities like trust and compassion and vulnerability and lean in during unprecedented times, I think heart-centered leadership has always had a place, Brian. I think it's just rose to the surface because COVID has helped it get there. And leaders were really leaning in, at least the ones that I was coaching last year, saying, what do I tell my people? How about the truth? How about saying you don't know what you don't know? We are in unprecedented times. We're in uncharted waters, if you will, to use a boat metaphor. But when you can lead and have the ability to have a safe environment that's welcoming and be approachable and strategic and compassionate for others, that's being heart-centered. So taking all of your business acumen, but having your heart aligned with your knowledge. And I find a lot of leaders are still leading, Brian, with that armor on their chest, which we like to refer to in the coaching world as a wall of resistance.
A wall of resistance.
And I think, especially the millennial generation, they are changing the times. They are changing the landscape of leadership. They get things done. They're very open-minded, and they're very, very much servant leaders, which is heart-centered in all that they are and all that they do. People come first.
Your second thing that you've got on your brochure is self-care principles. What are self-care principles, Deb?
Self-care principles are when you can model self-care as a leader, which really endorses that when we look after ourselves first, we shine in all the other areas of our life. So taking time for yourself every morning, having some quiet time. Most executives, Brian, from the time they get up in the morning to the time they go to bed, have 35,000 decisions, consciously and subconsciously, that they're thinking about
Every day, 35,000 decisions?
every day. Sometimes they have milliseconds to make a decision, delegate. So when they model self-care, number one, it's quieting their busy mind. It's opening them up for clarity, but it's also demonstrating in a leadership way, in a heart-centered way, that when we look after ourselves first, our self-awareness is the gateway to self-care. And when we can love ourselves first and look after ourselves first, everything else in our life aligns.
You've got another one called intrinsic versus extrinsic thinking in a team environment. What do you mean by that?
So we have three. When we talk about our habits of thinking, and I'll use this a neuroscience term here because I love neuroscience. We think about deductive science, which is deductive reasoning. We think in three different ways. So intrinsically is when we think about people. When we utilize heart-centered leadership, we put people first. When we think extrinsically, we're talking about material things, reports and data, our car, our house, our vacation. Or we even fall into the third realm of thinking, which is systemic. You know, the people that are all black and white, there's no gray. It's either yes or no or left or right. There's no room for anything else. So when we lead intrinsically and put people first in all that we are and all that we do, especially in leadership, that's being a heart-centered leader.
Listening is your best skill to hone and evolve?
Absolutely, every day. We all can say that we're good listeners, but we need to strive to be not even great, but exceptional. We all know what it's like when someone's not listening to us. But when you're engaged in a conversation and someone's looking you right in the eye, looking at your facial expressions, really honoring who you are, your body language, and they're hearing your message, not to respond, but to just listen attentively, it's one of the best skills that some of the best leaders have. I think the best person that, to give you a visual, that I think is one of the best global leaders and listeners is Barack Obama. Whenever he's in an interview, he sits on an angle. He's very upright with his body positioning. He's very attentive when someone's listening to him, speaking to him. And before he responds, I always call it the Barack Obama 5. He stops and pauses. He takes a deep breath. And if you count to 5, he doesn't start talking for 5 seconds. He's not responding as soon as you're done asking him a question. There's that little gentle pause in there because he's such an attentive listener. And if we all modeled that, most people are terrible listeners.
I used to work for Jimmy Pattison, self-made, billionaire. And he would say the line that I loved about, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So we would listen twice as much as we talk. But then he, unlike almost anyone else I've ever met, would add to it and say, and Brian, think about it. God gave us a mouth that can close and ears that never close.
I had an Irish Nana that taught me that at a very young age.
You've got another line here that I like. There's power in silence.
Have you ever sat on a park bench or just gone for a walk and stopped and there was nobody around and you were just watching and listening with your eyes and your ears?
No, I don't do that very often, actually.
It's powerful. One of the biggest challenges I give
Stop and smell the roses, I guess is what you're saying.
Absolutely. One of the biggest challenges I give my C-suite leaders is if they're too verbose. I will challenge them to go into a board meeting and say nothing. And it almost kills them. And then they say, I got the message loud and clear. I learned more today and I didn't talk.
Last week I interviewed another coach who's written a book called Pound On, who was saying lean in isn't enough. You got to pound on.
That's an interesting dynamic. I don't know if I fully agree. I'm all about leaning in. I don't know about pounding on, but that might just be their text around a concept that they have. It's probably a similar strategy, but I think leaning in for sure. We have to honor our emotions, especially now. It's still very much an unprecedented time right now in the world.
I love this one. I need you to explain it though. Done is better than perfect.
How many times have you had something on a list and you were going to get to it, going to get to it, going to get to it? Done is better than perfect because you started it and you finished it and you let go of perfection, which is never a tangible reality. Done is better than perfect is the same as saying, let's start and be progressive. And when we model that as leaders, it makes creativity and innovation for our teams limitless.
So is that, perfection is the enemy of the good, or is that different? It just means getting something done or getting started. Don't procrastinate.
Exactly, because procrastination is a fear-based behavior. If you get a good idea, start it. Get it in progress. Doesn't mean you have to finish it. But if you at least get it out there, done is better than perfect because it's not sitting on a list. It's not continued to be brought forward in your calendar. There's a deeper reason why people procrastinate, and the number one reason is fear. What if someone doesn't like it? What if they think I'm dumb? What if they don't? Life's too short. Get it done.
Kindness is strength.
Kindness is strength. I had 4 very, very non-leadership bosses after my dad passed away when I was 21 and I had to drop out of school. And what those women taught me was I went into my own business at 24. I'm 55 this month. So at the end of this month, I'm 31 years in business. And those 4 women taught me that that was definitely not the leader I was going to strive to be or become. And I was always told that you can't have kindness and love and heart-centeredness in the same sentence as business or business acumen. And I never believed it. And I'm still here, so I must be doing something right.
There's always room for humility and the ability to evolve.
How many leaders make mistakes?
Everyone makes mistakes.
Everyone makes mistakes. Nobody's perfect. And if we can be heart-centered and really be truthful, and again, that intrinsic value, step into someone else's shoes, sit in the observer's chair, see if you can even fathom how they can feel. And when we, exude and behave with humility, I think it just makes us a more connected world.
And you've also been speaking a fair amount about remote working. Are you a favor of remote working, or are you against it? Or is it just a reality we have to learn to live with right now?
It's kind of it's 2 answers. Yes and yes. Remote working, I'm married to someone who has an essential business and has worked all the way through this. I have nieces and nephews that are nurses and doctors and firefighters, so I'm on both sides of the coin. I think remote working has been phenomenal for a lot of families, especially families that have loved ones who are disabled or are sick. I have seen productivity go up with some of the organizations that I've worked with to the point that positions will be indefinitely remote. I've also seen humility and empathy by leaders not wanting to jeopardize the mental health of their staff. So there's so much bandwidth on this, Brian, that I love it. I do not know what it's going to look like when we return to that quote unquote normal. But I think a lot of companies, again, at least the ones that I'm coaching, and I'm coaching in 5 countries, so I think I've got a nice global lens on this, they're really going to leave it up to some of their staff for what is going to be best for them. A lot of businesses that I'm working with have had record years. They're doing better than they were before COVID. Productivity's up. Employees are happy. But there's always the population that has not done well through this for other reasons, whether it's social, economic, psychosocial. There's always going to be some population that's not going to thrive during a crisis. But overall, I've enjoyed working at home. I'm not missing traveling. I'm missing going on vacation. But I love that I'm not wasting time sitting on the 401.
We're chatting tonight with Deborah Crowe, who is a executive and leader coach, who's gone through some interesting experiences, and really is talking about heart-centered leadership, and a different kind, a different style of leadership. She used words like kindness and listening and silence. Fascinating. We're going to take a break and come back in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back. Brian Crombie on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting with Deborah Crowe, who is a executive coach. She believes in a interesting style of leadership, a style of leadership that is heart-centered, that is empathetic, that is listening, that is about self-care. She calls her podcast the I'm Perfect, the Heart-Centered Leadership Podcast. Fascinating beliefs that you have. Do you think they're mainstream, or are they coming of time, or what?
Well, the podcast was created in week 8 of COVID. And I kept hearing leaders say to me, "What do I say to my people?" And I kept repeating, "What about showing them your imperfections? How about being imperfect?" And saying that you have all the information that you have at hand. I'm telling you everything I know right now, and lead with your heart-centered leadership qualities. Let them be approachable, be trustworthy, offer that safe and welcoming environment. Let them know you're being a strategist to the best of your ability. So we just celebrated 1 year last Friday, April 30th, Brian, on the podcast, and I interviewed 100 leaders from around the globe. And what I learned was heart-centered leadership is not new. It's finally brought to the forefront. It's long overdue. And one CEO said to me that it's a breath of fresh air, and to keep standing on my soapbox and spreading the goodness around the world, which I'm going to keep doing.
Okay, and I appreciate that. But is it real?
Absolutely.
We seem to have so many examples of the authoritarian, hard driving, blank leader. Heart-centered leadership? Really?
Heart-centered lead, absolutely. Because the leadership that you're describing is what we talked about earlier in the show. You don't have to lead with an armor on your chest. And not being nice to your team. Do you think your team's going to want to work for you when you're not leading them very nicely? And do you want to work for someone like that and end up
I've
in
worked
hospice?
for people like that, and they have, an attitude of, well, you just turn them over and you get new people.
Well, I can tell you that those are the people that I used to manage on short-term disability claims. And people that lead like that need to look inward, because there's usually some component of their own worth and worthiness, and there's a condition on what they think of themselves. So when people exude that type of behavior, even though it's being projected at us, it has nothing to do with us, Brian.
Do you think there's going to be a course at business schools and MBA schools for heart-centered leadership in the future?
Well, I have 2 schools that have approached me to develop something, so I'm going to say yes.
What about in politics? We see former President Donald Trump, who has got to be the opposite of a heart-centered leader. And he got tons of votes because people said, I want this authoritarian. I want this strong leader. I want this, type of individual, because he's a great businessman and he's going to make success. Do you think we're going to have heart-centered leadership in politics too?
Well, I can tell you that I am coaching people both at the provincial and federal level. I'm hoping to have a ripple effect, but the good news is my foot's in the door, and I've been working with them for the last year. So the openness is there, and it only starts with one person to make a ripple. So a confident yes.
If people want to check out your website and your ideas or your podcast, how do they do that?
Absolutely. Everything's on debcrowe.com, and Crow has an E on the end.
debcrowe.com. Deb, thank you so much for joining us on the Brian Crombie Radio. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
Well, that's our show for tonight. Thanks for joining us.